The case of Austin Harrouff, a handsome, honor student, athlete, and cannibal. Can a young, physically healthy, and strong man suddenly lose his mind, turning into a wild beast? And if such a transformation does occur, where should one search for the root cause of this drastic change? Experts believe that such mental disorders are often hereditary, can be the result of traumatic experiences, substance abuse, or social isolation. Austin Harrouff's case stands out. It's not just a sudden bout of madness, a wild frenzy, or a personality disorder. Medical professionals have classified his condition as clinical delirium of lycanthropy, and the press has dubbed him a cannibal. It's believed that the young man suffers from a rare psychiatric syndrome where the patient believes they are transforming into an animal. However, the families of the victims, both injured and deceased from his transformations, are convinced that Harrouff feigned insanity to avoid accountability. Harrouff himself did not hide the fact that he had been consuming various narcotics and psychotropic drugs for a long time, but examinations showed he was clean at the time of committing the heinous acts. Now let's delve into this complex case from the beginning and trace how the scion of a wealthy and respected family, an honor student, and an athlete turned into a drug-dependent madman with an uncontrollable desire to taste human flesh. The golden boy Austin Malcolm Harrouff was born on December 21st, 1996, in the picturesque resort town of Palm Beach, Florida, and was the eldest of two children in a wealthy and respected family of doctors. His father was a renowned dentist with a network of private dental clinics, while his mother was a leading pharmaceutical specialist. The Harrouffs lived in a large, luxurious home by the ocean. A year and a half after Austin's birth, the family welcomed a younger child, a daughter named Haley. From a young age, the siblings were very close, calling each other best friends. Despite their privileged upbringing, it didn't mean the children were spoiled. Their parents ensured they received a quality education and supported their holistic development and creative potential. Austin was a straight-A student in school, passionate about playing the guitar, seriously engaged in wrestling and football, and performed in an amateur theater group. He considered himself creative and ambitious. Along with his parents and sister, Austin traveled the world, spending his vacations in new places each time. In an essay written during his high school years, Austin described himself as a happy and optimistic person, with a vivid imagination capable of conjuring anything he pleased. He also mentioned his perseverance in striving for excellence in academics and sports. However, he acknowledged his shyness as a weakness, which sometimes made it difficult for him to interact with peers. When Austin turned 13, his parents decided to separate. His father left the family home to his ex-wife and moved into an equally luxurious residence with his new love interest, who soon became his wife. The children stayed with their mother, but their father remained actively involved in their upbringing and provided financial support. Soon, his mother also found a new partner, marrying him within a year, and he moved into their home. The teenage boy struggled with his parents' divorce, but it's worth noting that his emotional turmoil did not affect his academic performance or athletic achievements. Dreaming of a career in medicine to follow in his parents' footsteps, Austin aspired to help and save lives, aiming to gain admission to a prestigious college specializing in medical studies. An honor student and social outcast. In high school, Austin transformed into a true heartthrob. He grew tall, reaching 6 feet 2 inches, boasted a muscular build, and was quite strong. His charming smile and innocent open gaze gave him an almost angelic appearance. However, Harrouff remained the same shy guy, which hindered his ability to socialize with peers and form romantic relationships with girls. In his personal diary, which he kept during his teenage years, he wrote about having almost no friends in school, as all his classmates labeled him a nerd and mocked him. The young man also expressed hope that everything would change for the better when he went to college, changed his social circle, and moved out of his parents' house. A few months before finishing high school, Austin discovered he had been admitted to the prestigious University of Florida's 4-year medical program. Successful completion of this program would open wide career prospects for him in the future, as well as the opportunity to continue his education at any medical school in the United States. The student was incredibly happy, as his dream had come true. Towards the end of August, his parents drove him to the college campus, where he was to begin his studies. Opening up in a vlog, Austin embarked on the independent adult life he had eagerly awaited, yet little changed for him. Due to his shyness, he still struggled to connect with peers. He briefly dated a lovely girl, but they soon parted ways because, as she put it, something about his behavior alarmed her, leading her to end the relationship. In his freshman year, Harrouff took a serious interest in bodybuilding, spending a lot of time in the gym and achieving impressive results. The young man developed steel muscles that looked very impressive. However, his success was not solely the result of perseverance and hard work. Steroids, which he began using regularly, also played a role. He openly shared this in his vlog on YouTube, which he started in the spring of 2016. Austin posted various videos on his channel. Some discussed sports and bodybuilding in particular. Others featured him singing with a guitar, doing cover versions of popular hits, or mimicking famous artists by copying their performance style. Still, others were about himself and his philosophical musings on life. Over time, however, his postings became increasingly alarming. The young man started urging his followers never to use steroids, claiming they could drive a person insane. He also said he had a crazy and normal side, and was confused by them. Austin began recording videos speaking in different accents, as if they were different people, sometimes changing the tone of his voice, or he could burst into tears mid-recording for no apparent reason. His mood and facial expressions also underwent strange transformations, at times appearing as if he was just making faces at the camera. Later, experts who reviewed his postings concluded that in each one, the young man was virtually pleading for help. For him, this blog became the only outlet and a way to express his feelings, as he failed to make any real friends during his studies. Moreover, these video recordings traced how the student gradually lost his sanity, with his behavior becoming more sensational, provocative, and even aggressive. Austin's subscribers suspected he was using some controlled substances and recorded his videos under their influence. They directly asked him about this in the comments, but he replied that it's unhealthy, and as an athlete, he would never use drugs. However, his behavior suggested otherwise, and one of the subscribers even speculated that Harrouff might have a dissociative identity disorder. What's wrong with Austin? When Austin returned home for the summer break, his mother and sister, who hadn't seen him in almost a year and hadn't watched his blog online, were literally shocked by the changes in him during that time. Austin had undergone a significant physical transformation, turning into a veritable mountain of muscle, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. He became odd in every sense, speaking nonsense and claiming he no longer needed sleep. Initially, his family didn't take his words seriously until the night came. Austin declared he would patrol the house, guarding his family's peace from some dark forces. And he indeed kept his promise, wandering around the house until morning. Moreover, every hour, he would check on his mother and sister's rooms, loudly assuring them they could sleep peacefully because he was on duty. The next morning, his mother decided to have a frank conversation with her son and directly asked him if he was using any drugs. Austin candidly admitted that he had tried virtually all drugs over the past year and even described how each one affected him. Among other things, he had taken a potent synthetic drug that caused severe hallucinations, fits of rage, and could lead to a fatal overdose. Nevertheless, he swore to his mother that it was all in the past, and he no longer touched the poison that drove him insane. After hearing her son out, Mrs. Harrouff made what was perhaps the main mistake. She did not seek help from qualified professionals, deciding she could help her son cope on her own. Being an experienced pharmacist, she took matters into her own hands. She gave her son a sedative and a sleeping pill, thinking it would help him relax and fall asleep after a sleepless night. However, Austin, after dozing off for just a couple of hours, was back on his post by night. He resumed patrolling the house until morning, informing its inhabitants every hour that all was quiet, and there was no need to worry. This went on for several weeks, but the mother still refused to involve psychiatrists or even inform her ex-husband about the situation. Early on the morning of August 13th, Austin knocked on the door of a former classmate living a few blocks from him. The girl was quite surprised since they hadn't seen each other in over a year, and he hadn't warned her of his visit. When she asked the reason for his appearance, Austin said he had forgotten what year he was born and urgently needed this information. The puzzled classmate answered that it was in 1996, after which the young man abruptly turned around and left without a word. Austin's stunt scared and puzzled the girl, so she immediately called Mrs. Harrouff and told her everything, asking if the boy might be using prohibited substances. Only then did the woman decide to call her ex-husband, who was working in another state, and shared her concerns that something was seriously wrong with their son. The boy's father flew to Florida the next day and, after talking with his son, suggested he voluntarily check into a clinic for an examination, to which the young man categorically refused. Then the man had a heart-to-heart conversation with his ex-wife, and together they decided to send their son for compulsory examination and subsequent treatment in a drug rehabilitation or psychiatric facility. However, they were unable to do so in time. A disturbing confession. The next day, Austin's friends invited him to join them at the beach, given the hot and sunny weather. His mother insisted that Haley go along to keep an eye on her brother. Austin was excited about the outing, but dressed unusually warm for the beach, as if heading to the mountains instead. He wore a thick athletic hoodie with long sleeves, matching pants, boots, and ski goggles. When his friends saw him dressed like that, they were initially silent, then burst into laughter a few seconds later. They teased Austin, asking why he was dressed that way and if everything was okay with him. Austin became seriously angry, shouting that if they thought he was crazy, then he would act accordingly and end one of their lives. The boys didn't take his words seriously, but backed off just to be safe. Haley noticed her brother was on the verge of a breakdown, so she decided to talk to him and calm him down. During their conversation, unheard by the others, Austin told his sister that he wasn't entirely human, but half wild animal, immortal, and possessed superhuman strength. His words frightened her, but she tried to remain calm to avoid provoking aggression from her brother. At the beach, Austin acted completely normal and natural. He joked, laughed, played volleyball with friends, and goofed around. As evening approached, they said their goodbyes, and everyone went their separate ways. Austin and Haley headed towards a small restaurant near the coast where they planned to meet their father and his current wife. On the way, Austin told Haley he intended to test his immortality, then headed towards a busy highway, planning to cross it inappropriately, directly through the fast-moving traffic. When Haley realized what was happening, she ran after her brother and physically dragged him away, begging him to hurry because they were expected. Austin agreed that they shouldn't make anyone wait, and silently followed his sister. At dinner, Austin behaved oddly again, silently getting up from the table several times to go outside, looking around as if he feared someone, then returning. He then decided to tell his father and stepmother about his immortality. When his father calmly suggested seeking professional help, Austin jumped up, shouted that he wasn't insane, shoved his father hard, and ran out of the restaurant. Attack on an elderly couple and their neighbor. What unfolded after the young man left the restaurant could be straight out of a horror movie. He later claimed to have no memory of the events and couldn't believe he was capable of such brutality. Austin walked several miles until he wandered into an unfamiliar neighborhood. There, the bright light from an open garage drew his attention, and he made his way towards it. In that home lived an elderly couple, 59-year-old John Stevens and 56-year-old Michelle Mishcon Stevens. In the evenings, they enjoyed barbecuing and watching movies in their spacious garage, set up like a living room. They had been married for over a quarter of a century, had 3 adult children living on their own, and were now enjoying their retirement and each other's company. That evening, John went for a walk with their dog while his wife prepared everything for their usual movie night. When Michelle saw an unfamiliar young man on their lawn, she felt no threat and even asked if he needed help. But the situation took an unexpected turn. The couple's neighbor, Jeffrey Fisher, lived across the street and was on friendly terms with the Stevens. Around 9 in the evening, he heard suspicious noises outside. Looking into the yard, he suddenly heard Michelle's agonizing scream. Without hesitation, he rushed to help his neighbors and saw a tall, large young man attacking the elderly woman by the open garage. Jeffrey tried to pull the stranger away, but the young man was overpoweringly strong, knocking Jeffrey to the ground. As he tried to recover, the assailant stabbed him several times in the back and shoulder. Realizing he was overpowered and needed help, Jeffrey ran into the Stevens house to draw the attacker's attention away from himself, and after exiting through the back door, headed to his own home. Only once inside did he realize the assailant had not followed him, but returned to the unfortunate Michelle. Jeffrey immediately called the police and emergency medical services, reporting an armed attack by a stranger with a knife and that he had been injured along with his elderly neighbor. After speaking with emergency services, Jeffrey fell silent, listening intently. Soon, he was convinced no one was outside his door, and the attacker had stayed at the neighbor's home. Moreover, the assailant was now making strange, animal-like sounds, similar to the growling of a wild beast, accompanied by screams of terror and moans. Fatal assault and gruesome act. It took the police about 10 minutes to arrive at the scene, but by then, it was tragically too late. The sight that greeted them was horrifying and beyond any logical explanation. 2 officers approached the garage, weapons drawn, only to freeze in disbelief at the doorway. There, in a pool of blood, lay the lifeless body of the homeowner, Michelle Mishcon Stevens. The autopsy later revealed she suffered multiple blunt force traumas to the head and a stab wound to the chest. A bit further in the dim light, 2 more individuals were on the ground, but it took a moment for the officers to process the scene. One man reached out, pleading for help in a strained voice. Above him was another man, seemingly choking him, gripping his neck with one hand and tilting his head back with the other. The officers demanded the attacker release the victim, threatening with their guns. But he showed no reaction. Firing was too risky due to the chance of hitting both individuals. Instead, one officer pulled out a taser, warned he was about to use it, and moved closer. Only then did he see the assailant was not just attacking, but actually biting the man's face, holding his head and neck firmly. The victim, as you might have guessed, was John Stevens. Beneath him spread a vast pool of blood. His left cheek was missing a chunk of flesh, and his lip, nose, and ear were also mutilated and seemingly chewed off. The elderly man was immobilized, barely able to move, silently begging for help. The officer shocked the attacker with the taser, but he seemed unaffected, continuing to tear at the victim's face with his teeth. A kick to the assailant's face only made him growl loudly and bite into Stevens's cheek again. Subsequent kicks did little to deter him. Reinforcements arrived, including a police dog, which was unleashed on the frenzied young man. The dog latched onto the assailant's arm, but he seemed to feel no pain, breaking free and injuring himself further. A powerful kick from an officer finally disoriented the attacker long enough to handcuff him. At this moment, the young man claimed he felt unwell, possibly having eaten something bad, before losing consciousness and convulsing. Emergency medical teams transported 4 individuals from the scene. Mrs. Stevens could not be revived, and her husband succumbed to his injuries en route to the hospital due to extensive blood loss from stab wounds and the shock of having his flesh consumed. The injured neighbor who reported the incident survived, but suffered permanent minor motor skill damage to his right hand due to nerve and tendon damage. As for the attacker, he slipped into a coma after ingesting a substance from a bottle in the garage he mistook for alcohol, which turned out to be weed perpetrator. He suffered severe burns to his esophagus and stomach, spent several days on the brink of life and death, but was ultimately saved by medical professionals. Fragmented memories. Austin spent nearly 2 weeks in a coma before he finally regained consciousness and was able to give his account, claiming he remembered nothing about the events of that day. Gradually, he began to recall the dinner at the restaurant and the argument with his father, after which he walked away. He then described seeing a ghost-like figure that led him through dark alleys and unfamiliar neighborhoods until a light appeared in the distance. The source of the light turned out to be a lantern near the Stevens garage, where the homeowner was preparing a barbecue and taking out food. When his presence startled the woman, she called for help. Austin admitted to striking her several times and then, drawing a knife, declared he would rid her of evil. At that moment, a man, neighbor Jeffrey Fisher, attacked him, whom Austin perceived as a demon, and he retaliated with the knife. After Fisher ran to seek help, Harrouff continued to assault the woman until she showed no signs of life. He then noticed a bottle, mistook its contents for alcohol, and drank about half. Soon after, he heard a dog barking and a man's voice. The homeowner had returned, shocked by the scene. Austin claimed no memory of what happened next, at least according to his own statements. Initially, there was speculation that Austin was under the influence of potent narcotics, which might explain his aggression and insensitivity to pain. However, when he was tested at the hospital, his blood showed no traces of drugs, medication, or alcohol. This led to the conclusion that Austin might have had a psychotic break, acting without awareness of his actions. Determining the truth of this claim was left to experienced psychiatrists. Between the courtroom and psychiatric care, the case of Austin Harrouff gained widespread media attention due to its unprecedented brutality and ambiguity. The children of the deceased couple, as well as the relatives of the injured neighbor, were convinced that the young man was feigning insanity and memory lapses in order to be declared incompetent and avoid severe punishment. This sentiment was shared by the majority of those following the case. The state-appointed psychological and psychiatric expert, Dr. Landrum, noted in his report that Mr. Harrouff's mental illness led to an acute psychotic episode, resulting in the death of 2 people. However, the prosecutor argued in court that he did not believe the defendant met the legal definition of insanity at the time of committing the crime. There were suggestions that the young man's mental health had deteriorated due to his experiments with various narcotics, steroid use, and difficulties in socializing with peers, which he had experienced since school. However, at the time of the crime, he was clean, with no traces of illegal substances or alcohol found in his blood, indicating that the reasons for his aggressive behavior lay elsewhere. During one of the court hearings, Austin's father revealed that there was at least one confirmed case of schizophrenia in their family, and he feared that this severe illness had been passed on to his son. It's worth noting that the student was suspected of having a rather rare disorder known as clinical lycanthropy delusion. Such a diagnosis could explain why the young man behaved like a wild beast and was impervious to pain, but none of the psychiatrists examining the defendant confirmed it. After treatment, Austin was transferred to jail, but the case remains unresolved to this day. The young man is still awaiting trial, and his lawyers insist that he is mentally ill. Meanwhile, the relatives of the deceased couple and the injured man have expressed hope in the interviews that Harrouff will be found competent and sentenced to death for his heinous acts. Blind rage. Did you know that with the arrival of the holidays, the number of incidents increases? Crimes, assaults, robberies. During Christmas and New Year holidays, law enforcement officers register hundreds of crimes. What is this fact connected with? Firstly, the celebrations are accompanied by mass consumption of alcohol. People lose the measure of drinking and accordingly erase the established boundaries of behavior. Even those who have not committed atrocities before lose control. The list can also be supplemented by those who have mental deviations. When the spirit of unity, peace, and love permeates everything around, this category of society feels especially lonely and depressed. By committing criminal acts, sociopaths compensate for their moral state. In this way, They resolve accumulated internal and external conflicts. On January 25, 2022, the funeral of 26-year-old Elle Edwards was held at St. Nicholas Church in Wallasey, Merseyside, England. To see the beautiful young woman off on her final journey came several hundred people. The body of the young woman was delivered on a karate catafalque drawn by 4 white horses. Her unexpected and ridiculous death could not be accepted by the family's siblings, and the cold-blooded crime, which occurred in full view of everyone, did not leave the lips of concerned citizens for a long time. A man stopped in the parking lot near the pub Beacon, located in Wallasey. The local establishment had a special flavor and was full of visitors on Christmas Eve. For hours on end, the stranger kept his eyes on the entrance to the establishment. He felt that this was the most opportune moment for revenge. In the run-up to the festivities, the attention of many would be lessened. This meant that if he carried out his plan, he would be able to get away unnoticed. When at last the target appeared on the horizon, he fired. With a sense of satisfaction, the perpetrator started the car and fled the scene. On December 24, 2022, there was no sign of trouble. The city atmosphere was filled with magic. Everyone was preparing for the upcoming holiday. The streets were not crowded. In search of missing products, some residents were actively shopping in stores. Those who had not yet bought gifts strolled through shopping centers. However, most citizens were at home with their families. Christmas is a time of gatherings and cozy company. The Edwards family was also involved in the pre-holiday hustle and bustle. In addition, everyone was waiting for Lucy, one of the daughters of the family. To meet the upcoming holidays with her family, the girl flew in from Dubai. Her sister Ella was especially looking forward to Lucy's return. They were close in spirit and kept in touch despite the distance of thousands of miles. When the joyful moment of meeting occurred, the girls decided to cross paths with friends at the local pub, Beacon. There they had a great time. They danced and sang and karaoke, joked and laughed a lot. It was calm and peaceful as never before. However, the general merriment was broken by loud clapping. "Are those fireworks?" someone asked in the crowd. No, the atmosphere of celebration was disturbed by someone's madness. At 11:50 p.m., 12 gunshots rang out at the entrance to the pub. The bullets hit 5 people, 4 guys, and 1 girl. Ella Edwards suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head. Someone familiar with her attempted to give her artificial respiration, but the efforts were futile. Elle's condition was deteriorating. The injuries were too severe. After calling emergency services, ambulances arrived at the scene of the shooting. Having examined the victims, the medics made a preliminary conclusion. The 22-year-old suffered leg injuries, the 24-year-old guy was wounded in the arm, and the 33-year-old man's wrist was injured. The condition of 26-year-old Ella and the 28-year-old guy was deemed critical. On the way to the hospital, the unfortunate woman, without regaining consciousness, passed away. Ms. Edwards's injuries proved incompatible with life. Only a few hours before the crime, Elle had been talking to her father. "I was busy with Christmas preparations when the police reported what had happened," Tim Edwards later recalled. "It came as a real shock to our family. Everyone who knew Elle found it hard to believe what had happened. After all, she was so young and beautiful for her early demise. Did she really have ill wishers in her entourage who were capable of such a thing?" Ella Edwards was a very beautiful and cheerful girl. She worked as a beautician in a local beauty parlor and also worked part-time as a dental assistant. Despite her young age, she was established in life and had a good income. She was very goal-oriented and had no plans to rest on her laurels. Ella was not deprived of male attention. Nature awarded her with outstanding external data. Her friends noted that in addition to external beauty, her inner beauty stood out. She was very kind and positive. The character of Ms. Edwards allowed to find a common language even with the most capricious customers. For what the employee was on good account with the management. Thanks to the love of beauty and makeup, the girl was waiting for a brilliant future. However, life ordered otherwise. At the first stages of the investigation, there were no clues. The intruder attacked us suddenly as he disappeared, At the scene of the crime, he left only shell casings and victims bleeding. Detectives knew one thing for sure: the attack was planned. Police needed time to determine if Ellie was the target of the attack or was a random victim. For the most part, law enforcement officials were leaning toward the idea that the girl was among the victims by accident. Detectives interviewed the victim's family to get a better understanding of the victim's personality and the specifics of her life. All spoke positively about the girl and frankly did not understand that someone could have attacked her intentionally. From their words, the deceased had no enemies. Ella was very beautiful. Perhaps there would even be those who envied her or wanted to be close to her. However, it is unlikely that the crime occurred on the basis of envy or jealousy. The Edwards family's words reinforced the police's speculation. The fact is that recently in the city has become not uncommon cases of strife between rival criminal groups. Sometimes, as a result of their use of firearms, innocent citizens suffered. Afterwards, the victims and witnesses of the incident were interviewed. It took a long time to check cell phone service. Officers also recovered CCTV footage from the pub. The investigation was to examine them. The authorities also contacted the media. They called on people with information to help bring those responsible to justice. Above all, this involved providing video footage from mobile devices that had been taken on the night of the incident. Any of them could show the car in which the attacker arrived. City officials held a meeting with local residents. First and foremost, they wanted to support and reassure concerned citizens. The next goal the meeting had was to convince eyewitnesses to share the data they had. It was possible that someone might have seen the moment of the attack or even known the perpetrator. A group of volunteer activists was organized who went door to door and talked to citizens. The result of the work was not long in coming. It was soon established that the attacker left the pub parking lot in a dark Mercedes A-Class. CCTV cameras also showed that having pulled up to the establishment, the offender waited for some time. Apparently, he was choosing the most convenient moment for the attack. When Elle and other young people were outside, he fired shots. After that, he quickly got into a car and drove away. It was possible to establish the moment of the crime and the fact that the attacker was alone. However, it was not possible to determine where the intruder went, so detectives went door to door interviewing the residents. Hoping to identify the attacker, they described the vehicle and the circumstances of the incident. All city streets were patrolled around the clock. On December 25th, the funeral of the murdered girl was held. Despite it being Christmas Day, the site of the victim's last funeral was closed as a sign of grief and remembrance for the victims. The owner of the Beacon pub left a message on his social media page with words of support for the family of Ellie Edwards. On the same day, her father laid flowers at the door of the establishment. "To my beautiful Elle, the light of my life, you will always be with us," he whispered. Already on December 26th, 2 suspects were detained. They were a 19-year-old Rock Ferry resident and a 30-year-old man from Tranmere. The woman was taken into custody on suspicion of conspiracy to commit a felony. 2 days later, another arrest was made against another Tranmere resident. The 31-year-old man was also suspected of conspiracy to commit a felony. At the time of his arrest, the 2 earlier arrestees remained at the station. The names of the detainees were not released due to lack of direct evidence. All 3 were soon released. The police failed to prove their involvement in the crime. The locals were angry at the rampant crime and the impotence of the police. Therefore, the detectives were forced to issue a statement again. They said that the investigation would continue until the culprit was identified and punished. It was still assumed that the shooting at the Beacon pub had been caused by a feud between local gangster clans, and the unfortunate Elle Edwards was seen as a random victim. On December 30th, law enforcement reported that the 3 male victims had been released from the hospital and the condition of the critically wounded 28-year-old had finally normalized. On January 3rd, 2023, police reported that about 150 pieces of data were obtained during the investigation. Among them was some very important information. It was found that the bullets fired by an unknown person could have been intended for Jake Duffy and Kieran Salkeld. The boys were part of a local gang. The group could not share a territory where illegal substances are traded with a rival clan. According to information obtained from closed sources, the two were seen scuffling on December 23rd. Apparently, the two did not take the fight that took place as a looming threat to their gang. Therefore, the next day the bandits went on vacation to Mayak. By their appearance there, they put the other visitors in the gunman's crosshairs. At the same time, thanks to video surveillance systems, managed to track the car on which the criminal left the scene of the crime. However, the intruder was ahead of the detectives. New Year's Eve turned out to be as turbulent as Christmas. The police station received a report of a fire near the Beacon pub. When officers arrived at the scene, they found a car matching the description of the wanted vehicle. Despite the fact that the vehicle burned out completely, the examination confirmed its identity. Apparently, the perpetrator knew that the police were on the trail, so he set the fire in order to destroy the evidence. It was also possible to establish that the car was stolen. On January 11th, the total number of people suspected in the murder of L. Edwards rose to 5. Detectives said they had made an arrest of a 22-year-old man and a 23-year-old woman from Wirral. On January 13th, police announced the capture of the perpetrator of the shooting. He turned out to be Connor Chapman. Despite his young age, the boy was well known to police in the criminal world. He had a long record of robbery, hooliganism, threatening behavior, and aggravated carjacking. The latter offense was a real star attraction as he made headlines in many newspapers. He has been charged with several offenses in the current case. At the same time, the 23-year-old woman who was detained was released on bail. The investigation continued. It turned out that on the afternoon of December 24th, there was a scuffle between two rival groups. The cause was an area near a wooden church located in Beechwood. The altercation was very violent, but no compromise was reached. Somehow, Chapman became aware that several of his enemies were celebrating Christmas Eve at a local establishment. Instead of spending his first Christmas outside of prison in 4 years with his family, Connor opted for revenge. So L. Edwards really was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And Chapman wasn't acting alone. Investigators managed to find out the name of another defendant in the case. It was 20-year-old Thomas Waring. The guy was taken into custody. He was charged with possession of firearms and assisting a criminal. During a search of Thomas's home was found significant evidence for the investigation. It was a videotape taken before the incident. It shows Connor picking up a gun and saying he was going to get even with someone. After the shooting, the perpetrators hid the stolen car. Later, in order to confuse the investigation, they ordered a cab under an assumed name. At around 5 a.m., the criminals returned to the place where they had hidden the Mercedes. In order not to waste time eliminating traces, they decided to get rid of the direct evidence in the case. As for Connor Chapman's identity, it was criminalized from a young age. He was born in Birkenhead, Liverpool. He was raised by his grandparents. The boy was abandoned by his parents at an early age. Since the teenager studied poorly, he dropped out of school shortly before his exams. In general, Connor has always been a problem child. Therefore, special hopes for the guy did not lay on neither teachers nor relatives. Chapman committed his first crime, shoplifting, at the age of 14. In 2016, he committed a carjacking. In 2017, another theft was joined by possession of a controlled substance. For the past 2 years, Chapman has been under police supervision and had restraining orders. However, he was more than willing to violate them. He was eventually deemed a danger to the community, so they restricted his access to several parts of the city. In 2018, he violated the ban again. Connor was in a restricted area. He also had a knife and illegal substances on him. That same year, the public heard about him for the first time. His sorry excuse for stealing a car became an anecdote among the local population. 18-year-old Connor had no intention of getting on the straight and narrow. Last time he stole an Audi. When a patrolman on the streets of the city noticed the stolen car, he ordered the driver to stop. Chapman, however, had no intention of obeying the officer's instructions. With all his might, he pressed the gas. He only provoked a chase. Along the way, the guy committed other offenses on the road. He ended up crashing into a curb. The car was thrown sideways and spun around. As a result, the carjacker was forced to leave the cabin. After not traveling a great distance, the runner was caught. The patrol caught up with Connor in the bushes. In his defense, he said he was expecting a buddy. His phrase later became a catchphrase. At trial, the defense fiercely argued for Chapman's freedom. The defense argued that the guy was under the influence of bad company, and also claimed that he was diagnosed with ADHD and a number of other mental disorders. This report was issued by a private specialist during the trial. The lawyer insisted that Connor was innocent and needed to be released. Thus, he was sentenced to 8 months in juvenile prison. Upon release, he was also brought a driving ban. This was a fairly minor punishment for a repeat offender who had 14 convictions for 30 criminal episodes. The young criminal clearly had no intention of stopping and spit on all societal rules. In January 2220, Connor went on trial again. This time, he was sentenced to 10 months in prison for being caught in a public place with pockets full of illegal substances. After serving his sentence, he was arrested again for 5 episodes of the offenses. At the same time, Chapman boasted of questionable accomplishments. He proudly claimed that he spent more time in prison than he did on the outside. Eventually, by the time he was 20 years old, he had received 19 convictions for 43 felonies. 6 months before the horrific incident at the Beacon pub, Connor was tried again. The lawyer insisted that the guy had realized everything and was finally ready to reform. Chapman himself confirmed the words of the stitch-up. As mitigating circumstances, the lawyer cited the impending birth of Connor's girlfriend. Pressing on pity, he said that the first child was born when the guy was behind bars. At the time of the last trial, the police were aware that Connor was in a gang and selling illegal substances. However, oddly enough, he was only tried for burglarizing a house and stealing a couple of electric motorcycles. Perhaps there was corruption involved in the case. At least the high-priced lawyer worked off the fees he was paid. Amazingly, everyone recognized that the guy was dangerous. At one time, law enforcement officials even made a statement on television telling the public to be wary of Connor. After committing a crime, he would serve his sentence and then be released again. It's a vicious criminal cycle. However, there was no good reason for Chapman's isolation. Most likely, it was due to the fact that no one was seriously hurt by his actions. The public was extremely indignant about the gaps in the law. It appeared that nothing could be done with hardened criminals until they maimed someone or killed them. On June 13, 2023, the trial of Connor Chapman began at Liverpool Crown Court. 12 members of the Edwards family took part. Prosecutor Nigel Power announced what the defendant was charged with. Chapman pleaded not guilty to all charges. The fact that the guy was caught on CCTV footage, he tried to deny. Connor this time said that on the night of the attack, he was at home wrapping presents. He was also evasive about the stolen car. At first, he denied stealing the Mercedes. Connor claimed that the car belonged to his gang. Later, he said that he had burned it because he had learned that one of his associates had committed a crime with the car. As sufficient evidence had been collected, his lie was obvious. The trial lasted 3.5 weeks. During this time, all the circumstances of the crime were established. The real reason for the shooting on December 24th in a local pub was rage and revenge, which Chapman could not control. In fact, he didn't care who got in the way at the time of the massacre of Jake Duffy and Kieran Salkeld, members of a rival gang. Prior to that, he had acquired a Scorpion submachine gun. The weapon could fire about 15 shots in less than 1 second. Connor jumped into the stolen car and drove to the Beacon. Before firing the shot, he kept surveillance for 3 hours. In the meantime, the security camera captured Elle happily socializing with friends. She even left briefly to go into another pub before taking her sister Lucy home and returning again. At 11:47 p.m., the girl showed up outside again to have a smoke. To her misfortune, she found herself next to Chapman's targets. At this time, Connor was just in the parking lot. His long brown hair was visible on camera, as well as his face covered by a hood or balaclava. A short time later, as he heeled toward his car for further escape, he fired 12 shots. The resulting wound rendered Ella unconscious and fell on top of Salkeld. Thus, L. Edwards received bullets that were not meant for her. After the attack, Connor was going to flee to Spain, but literally at the airport was detained by law enforcement officers. To cover their tracks, Chapman and Waring set fire to the car and got rid of the weapon, which, by the way, was never found. However, traces of Connor's DNA were found on one of the shell casings, which indicates that the defendant loaded the gun before firing it. During the search of his home, red gloves were found which were clearly visible on the pub's CCTV footage. They were also found to have his DNA on them. All of these facts linked Chapman to the massacre that took place. By the way, while the perpetrator was awaiting sentencing, both of his attack targets were behind bars. Before the jury of 5 men and 7 women went to discuss the verdict, Tim Edwards was given the opportunity to speak. He said he had been forced to view CCTV footage before the trial. "It's horrible to see your daughter die and not be able to prevent it. I will never forget it. Ellie was in the street with her back turned to her perpetrator," the father reported. He added that if the shots had come 6 inches up or to the side, his Elle would still be alive. Ella's father hoped the final verdict would be fair, and the perpetrator would never again be able to spend Christmas with his family on the loose. It took the judges 3 hours to come to a unanimous decision. On July 7, 2023, Connor Chapman was sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility after 48 years. The Edwards family was happy that the cold-blooded criminal would be behind bars for the rest of his life. The convict cynically committed the crime and did not even think to repent of it. It was proved at the trial that the pub shooting was the culmination of a feud between the Woodchurch and Beechwood estate gangs on both sides of the M53. Thomas Waring was also found guilty of all charges against him. He was sentenced to 9 years in prison by the court the same month. Such a short sentence was probably due to the fact that the lad, unlike Chapman, had little criminal experience. The public was outraged. Innocent citizens were once again caught up in criminal disputes. They were even angrier that potentially dangerous gang members often served minimal sentences. Prohibitions, which are used by the courts as additional penalties, have little effect. This became particularly evident in the case of Connor Chapman. The lad was subject to a ban on being on the premises where the pub was located, as well as a ban on driving. To ensure the safety of the public, they proved ineffective. The death of L. Edwards was proof of that. The incident highlighted the need for a review of the existing legal framework. In addition, the brazen attack once again highlighted the problem of firearms availability. After several similar deaths in the county of Merseyside, the government has allocated $350,000 to implement a pilot program. It is linked to reducing gun crime across the region. Tim Edwards also announced the organization of a fund to support victims of gun violence. One of the main goals of the national authorities should be to reduce the number of guns in the hands of civilians and criminal gangs. Father L. expressed his views. He also added that carrying weapons, even for children, is becoming the norm. The younger generation is particularly vulnerable to what they see and hear. Mr. Edwards recalled that during his childhood years, he never heard of any of the kids picking up a gun, much less knowing where to get one. In his words, everyone has become very vulnerable in today's society. People are not safe anywhere. An attack can happen in a private home, on the street, or in a crowded place. A prime example of this was the party at the Beacon Pub on Christmas Eve 2022. A celebration that should have been full of joy and warmth for L. Edwards turned into an irreparable tragedy. This high-profile story took place in January 2023 in the state of Pennsylvania, Limerick Township. The township, named after the first settler William Evans, is one of thousands of small and cozy towns scattered across the country. Here, a measured and quiet life flows, and it seems that nothing can disturb this harmony. In such places, the inhabitants know each other by sight, and their friendship makes many of them one family. Jennifer and Blair's friendship began while they were working together. They were once business partners, collaborating on common projects. However, even after Blair decided to become a simple chef, their bond did not lose its strength. Their friendship grew beyond business and became more than just a working relationship. Their friendship took on a special significance because of Jennifer's 8-year-old son, Noah, who has autism. Blair had always given his friend genuine support and helped her in caring for Noah. Their children were also friends. They often spent time together, and when the children's games would run late, Noah would stay overnight at the Watts house. Jennifer Brown, born in 1979, was an active and full of life woman. She was always smiling and exuded an energy that infected everyone around her. Friends and relatives often wondered how she managed to combine so many things and be active. But her true calling was motherhood. About the father of her son, Noah, nothing was known. But this situation did not overshadow their lives, but on the contrary, made Jennifer stronger, especially after Noah was diagnosed in early childhood with autism. Taking care of her young son, Jennifer became a reliable support and best friend for him. Mom and son were inseparable friends, spending a lot of time together, sharing moments of joy and supporting each other in times of need. This friendship between them evoked feelings of tenderness and admiration from all who knew their family. The people of the small town saw their closeness and adored this family for their cheerfulness and genuine kindness. Unfortunately, none of them could have anticipated what would happen to Jennifer one winter day. On January 3, 2023, she disappeared without a trace. On the morning of January 4, 2023, the local Limerick Township Police Department received a disturbing call from Antonio Blair Watts Richardson. He was deeply concerned about the disappearance of his close friend. Even though it had been less than 24 hours since he had last seen her or heard her voice, the anxiety inside him was growing by the minute. For hours now, Tony had tried unsuccessfully to contact Jennifer, but all his attempts had gone unanswered. This behavior was completely unlike her. She was active and responsible, always answering calls or messages, especially in matters concerning her son Noah. However, on this day, for some reason, the boy's mom did not meet him after school. The missing person's family and friends were well aware of what a devoted mother and caring woman she was. Therefore, the sudden disappearance caused serious alarm to all who knew her and left no one indifferent. Antonio's call to the police was the first step in a long and mysterious investigation that would soon engulf the entire city and shake it with its tragedy. Immediately after Blair reported his girlfriend missing, a massive search began. Police officers, family, and friends joined forces, hoping to find any trace that might shed light on Jennifer's disappearance. It left many questions in the air, and the main one was, what could have caused the caring mom to leave her son without any explanation? At 4 o'clock that afternoon, Officer Stephen Crawford of the Limerick Township Police Department went to the Brown family home to check on what was going on in the family home. He found that her vehicle was parked by the porch, and upon entering the home, he discovered that her keys, purse, tablet, and work cell phone were still in the house. However, the officer was unable to locate Jennifer's personal cell phone. Later, when police tried to track it down, it was discovered that the phone had been turned off at 7 a.m. on January 4th and could not be traced since then. The last location the signal came from was near Lewis Road and Ridge Pike in the town of Limerick. This was the first serious trace in the investigation and a sign that something terrible had happened to Jennifer. She was reported missing and police began investigating the case. Investigators began questioning her family, friends, and neighbors, hoping to find out if anyone had seen or heard anything at the time Jennifer disappeared. None of the young woman's loved ones or acquaintances, however, could provide any useful information. Her aunt, Diane Brem, and Jennifer's friends, Tiffany Barron and Blair Watts, claimed that there was no way the young mother would have left alone, as she could not leave her son alone. This was a woman full of devotion and love for her child. All efforts made by the authorities and volunteers were fruitless. They could not find any traces or clues as to where Jennifer might have been. Her loved ones appealed to the public through the media for any information on the possible whereabouts of the young woman. A reward was set up, but that too was inconclusive. The case of Jennifer Brown's mysterious disappearance was just beginning to develop, leaving investigators and family with questions and anxious expectations. The police investigation began with a close look at all the circumstances of that day, and her close friend Blair Watts, who was the last person to see Jennifer alive that day, came to the forefront. It was an ordinary January day. Jennifer and Blair sat in the cozy living room discussing life, future plans, and their children. Their children often played together, and Jennifer had asked her friend for help to pick up her son Noah from school so they could spend the evening together. This was a common practice for friends. Blair, being the loyal friend that he was, agreed, and after finishing their conversation, immediately headed to the school to pick up Noah. The next day, however, something strange happened. At school, Noah behaved unusually and caused his teachers concern. They noticed that the boy had missed 2 doses of his medication that helped him manage his condition due to his illness. This was highly unusual, as Jennifer had always been a devoted mother, never neglecting her son's caregiving responsibilities and always being in touch with teachers if anything happened at school. The school staff tried to find out where his mom was and was told by Noah that she had gone to the grocery store and had not returned. This caused even more concern, as this behavior of a sensitive woman was very uncharacteristic. She never left her son alone. At this time, Jennifer's friend, Blair Watts, also tried unsuccessfully to contact her. After not hearing back or contacting Jennifer, Blair decided to see if she would show up to pick up her son from the bus stop. However, when the woman never showed up and concern grew by the minute, Blair had no choice but to go to the police and report his friend missing. As time passed, no new information about the possible whereabouts of the missing woman had emerged since the investigation began. Hopes for her return were fading with each passing day. It seemed that Jennifer had disappeared without a trace and might never be found. But on January 18th, 2 weeks after her disappearance was reported, 2 employees working in a warehouse near Roseford, in the neighboring municipality of Limerick Township, discovered something strange. They came out of the building to get coffee and saw what appeared to be a freshly dug hole in front of them. When they went closer to inspect it, they were horrified to find the body of a woman buried in a shallow grave. The workers immediately notified the police, who immediately arrived at the burial site. Upon examining the body, police identified the young woman they had been searching for the past 2 weeks as Jennifer Brown. The sheriff called her family and informed them that the missing woman's body had been found partially buried near a warehouse in Roseford. An autopsy revealed that Jennifer's death was clearly violent. Death was due to asphyxiation, and she had 3 broken ribs. This indicated that Jennifer had probably struggled with her killer, who had beaten her to subdue her. Now the nature of the investigation changed. The missing person case was reclassified as a murder case. Police once again began interviewing everyone who was close to the murdered woman, including her family and friends. However, these interviews yielded no new information about the case, and the police had no suspects. It seemed as if the investigation was about to wind down and the police had no one to follow up on. But later, when detectives least expected it, they got a lead from an unexpected source. After the news of Jennifer's disappearance and murder was published, the police called for anyone who had any information that could help unravel this mysterious story to come forward to investigators. Noah's teacher came to that call. She recalled a case that at first glance seemed unimportant to her, but after Jennifer's death was recognized, raised serious suspicions. The teacher said that Noah shared with her an important detail about that terrible day, January 4th, when Jennifer disappeared. Little Noah told her that when Blair Watts picked him up from the bus stop on January 3rd, the boy noticed that among Blair's belongings was his mom's personal cell phone. Noah recognized it immediately, as the lock screen displayed his own childhood photo. That moment turned out to be key in the investigation into the young woman's murder. Previously, investigators had already assumed that Jennifer's killer carried away her cell phone. Now Blair Watts came into the spotlight, becoming the main suspect. The police began to scrutinize the relationship between Jennifer and Blair, and mysterious details began to come out, shocking even experienced investigators. Jennifer and Tony's friendship seemed solid and long-standing. They spent a lot of time together, knew each other well, and their families interacted with each other. But once the business side of their relationship came to light, it turned out there was a dark history lurking beneath the mask of friendship. Blair Watts was the owner of a restaurant called Birdie's Kitchen, which unfortunately fell into disrepair and closed in early 2022. After this, Blair turned to his friend, asking her for help. In August 2022, Jennifer decided to invest in her friend's business to help him revive Birdie's Kitchen in a new location. They entered into a contract that stipulated that Jennifer would provide regular financial contributions to keep the restaurant going every 6 weeks or so in order to rebuild Birdie's Kitchen and get it back on the market. According to Blair, from August through January, Jennifer turned over approximately $36,000 to him to rebuild the business. They also agreed that she would hand him another $9,000, according to their agreement. Blair found a new location for the restaurant and was to deposit some of the money as rent, enter into a contract, and reopen Birdie's Kitchen in January 2023. However, it turned out that the money provided for the investment was spent on Blair's personal needs. The property owners with whom he had entered into the agreement drew attention to his failure to fulfill his financial obligations. Therefore, on December 26, 2022, they terminated the agreement with him. Blair found himself in a desperate situation. He lost not only his money, but also the opportunity to open his restaurant. The police began to suspect that in desperation he had decided to commit a terrible crime to save his business. Looking closely at the financial transaction history on Jennifer's iPad, investigators discovered 2 unauthorized transfers of $17,000 to Birdie's Kitchen on January 3rd. The funds were not included in the formal agreement between Brown and Blair. In addition, the transfers failed several times and were only successful after the 2-factor authentication system on the iPad was disabled, which increasingly pointed to Jennifer's friend's involvement in her murder. Police then interviewed the owners of the property, who had terminated their lease with Blair. It turned out that on January 4th, the very day Blair reported Jennifer missing, he appeared before them, saying he had the funds to enter into a lease agreement. Investigators were convinced that Blair was the killer. However, realizing that he would never admit his guilt, they needed to gather irrefutable evidence. Their first step was to interview Blair's wife, Tiara Taylor, and find out where Blair was the day Jennifer disappeared. Tiara told detectives that on January 3rd, Blair visited the Brown family around 1 p.m. and did not return home until 4:30 a.m., when he picked up Noah from the bus stop. Tiara also claimed that her husband came home only briefly and then left again around 5 p.m. and did not return until late that night. This time frame became a key point. Further investigation revealed that Blair had spent the night with Tatiana Garrett, his mistress, and did not meet up with her until around 8 p.m. This meant that between 5 and 8 p.m., Blair had no alibi. Based on the available evidence, detectives put together an alleged chronology of the murder. According to their version, on January 3rd, Blair went to Jennifer's house while Noah was at school at about 1 p.m. and allegedly killed her. He then made 2 transfers of funds from the murdered woman's iPad to his account and left to pick up Noah from the bus stop around 4 p.m. Later, he returned to Jennifer's house, dropped Noah off, and traveled back to the crime scene to dispose of the body. He took the body to a field near Roseford and buried it in a shallow grave. From there, the killer made his way to Tatiana's house, where he spent the rest of the night. Everything was carefully planned, and it would seem that the murderer might have gone unnoticed had it not been for one mistake he made, and it proved fatal. That mistake was letting Noah see his mother's cell phone. That was the key moment that led the police directly to Blair. Law enforcement now had enough evidence to convict Blair, but they decided to investigate further to see if he was guilty. It took the involvement of film experts and a specially trained dog capable of detecting cadaveric odors indoors. First, the dog was brought to Jennifer's home so that it could memorize the woman's scent. There, in her own kitchen, the terrible crime had taken place. The police then directed the dog to Blair's car, and it instantly detected the same depressing odor. It was the last piece of evidence needed to bolster detectives' confidence in Blair's involvement in the murder. On February 8th, after months of investigation, Blair was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, third-degree murder, and theft. He is currently incarcerated at the Montgomery County Correctional Facility with no bail application and awaiting a preliminary hearing where he will have to answer for his horrific acts before the law. Jennifer's friends and family were on the brink of despair when they discovered her dead, but their hearts are still pierced by the pain and shock that the killer was someone they knew and trusted, someone who should have been a close friend to Jennifer and her son. But now that the killer has been identified and brought to justice, they can finally feel that justice has been served. Tiffany Barron, a friend of Jennifer's who spoke on behalf of the family, expressed her feelings during the interview. "I still dream about Jennifer. Noah keeps asking about my mom, and I don't know what to say. At the conclusion of the investigation and trial, if Blair is found guilty, he will spend the rest of his life in custody. The case was solved thanks to the attentiveness of Jennifer's 8-year-old son. The boy noticed a mistake made by the killer. This helped to discover the truth and punish the criminal. The tragedy in Limerick Township serves as another reminder that even the most carefully planned crimes will sooner or later be solved. Meanness and inhumanity will not go unpunished, and the perpetrators will sooner or later be brought to justice before the law.